Kris Jenner, that name alone is enough to make people lean in a little closer, right? Because lately, the conversations around her are not the usual momager genius type. It's getting darker and messier and honestly confusing, like one of those stories where you're sitting with your friends and someone goes, wait, no, it gets worse. And you just know you're about to hear something insane. So listen, this whole thing didn't even start with gossip blogs or TikTok theories. That's what makes it wild. It actually traces back to something sitting on a government website, a complaint, not a leak, not some random Reddit thread, but an actual filing connected to the case of Ghislaine Maxwell. And in that complaint, Kris Jenner's name shows up in a way nobody expected. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, this is where you have to stay grounded. A complaint is not proof. It's basically someone making claims and asking for an investigation. But still, the claims, they're not small. They're the kind that make even people who don't care about celebrity drama stop and go, hold on, what? The person filing it alleges that there was a system. And not just any system, but something that, in their words, mirrors the structure of what Jeffrey Epstein was convicted for. And when you hear that comparison, you already know this isn't like gossip anymore. This is serious territory. And here's where it gets layered. The same Department of Justice holding that complaint, a federal judge, Paul Engelmeyer, has already ruled that they misled the public in a separate matter. So now people are looking at the whole situation like, wait, if they've been called out for being dishonest before, how much trust do we even put into what they say now? That's when Joe Rogan comes into the conversation and you know things are about to shift tone. Because Joe Rogan isn't someone who usually just runs with wild theories, especially on this topic. In fact, his whole credibility in this situation comes from one specific moment. Back in 2017, after Epstein's conviction was already public knowledge, a physicist named Lawrence Krauss tried to introduce Rogan to Epstein. And Rogan's reaction, not curiosity, not hesitation, straight rejection. He literally responded like, "Are you serious?" and shut it down immediately. No meeting, no second thought. He Googled Epstein, saw the red flags, and walked away. Compare that to people like Bill Gates, who still had meetings with Epstein after everything was already known. That contrast matters because it builds Rogan's credibility in this specific space. So now when someone like Joe Rogan hears about this Kardashian-related complaint and goes quiet, people notice, not because silence proves anything, but because it's out of character for him. He's usually quick to call things out, either dismissing them or questioning them. But here, there was a pause. And that pause is what people are reading into. And you know how it goes. Once people start connecting dots, even loosely, the conversation spreads fast. The complaint itself talks about identity issues, alleged use of someone's name, references to pregnancies and surrogacy, even mentions of business deals tied to Kylie Jenner. Then it pulls in Kim Kardashian, Khloe Kardashian, and Kendall Jenner in different ways. But here's the key detail people keep skipping over. The complainant themselves admits they don't have full proof. They're asking investigators to look into it. That's a huge difference from something being proven in court. Still, the fact that it exists at all is what's fueling everything. Now add another layer, the timing. The Kardashian rise to fame happened during the exact same period Epstein was still moving in elite circles after his 2008 plea deal. Again, not proof of anything, but enough for people to start asking questions about overlapping worlds. And then there's the whole access economy angle people keep bringing up. The idea that in Hollywood and elite circles, access to powerful people is currency. Kris Jenner has always been known for positioning her daughters around influential men, building connections, creating opportunities. That's been her brand from day one. But now some people are looking at that same strategy and asking uncomfortable questions. Not saying it's the same as Epstein's network, but asking whether the structure, access in exchange for influence and power, feels similar. That's where the conversation gets messy because it's interpretation, not fact. And just when you think that's enough, another name gets pulled in. The family's lawyer, Alex Spiro, reportedly appears in Epstein-related documents. Again, that alone doesn't prove anything. Lawyers represent all kinds of clients, but in a story like this, every overlap becomes a talking point. At this point, it's not even one clean narrative anymore, it's layers. complaints, past cases, public figures reacting, timelines overlapping, and people are just trying to figure out what's real, what's exaggerated, and what's being completely misunderstood. And honestly, sitting here talking about it, it feels less like a single story and more like one of those situations where the deeper you go, the more complicated it gets. Like you open one box and there's another inside and another inside that, and you're left wondering, where does it actually end? Kris Jenner is still at the center of it, but now the story starts pulling in even more names. And that's when things really start to feel like one of those conversations where everyone at the table is talking at once, because it's no longer just about a complaint sitting quietly on a government site. Now you've got lawsuits, old friendships turning weird, and people from the past suddenly being dragged back into the spotlight. So let's talk about Ray J for a second, because his name keeps coming up, and not in a subtle way. He's not just making comments online or hinting at things. He actually filed legal action involving Kim Kardashian and Kris Jenner. And what he's pushing is that their past settlement, the one tied to the tape that made Kim famous, shouldn't stay private anymore. And that matters because a judge has already denied the Kardashian side's attempt to keep parts of that settlement sealed. So now people are like, wait, what exactly is in there that they didn't want anyone to see? Because usually when something is fought this hard to stay hidden, curiosity just goes through the roof. Ray J has been very direct. He's been saying for a while that the narrative everyone believes about how that tape came out isn't the full story. According to him, it was orchestrated, planned, and used strategically. Now, again, allegations are not proof, but the fact that it's being argued in court makes it way more serious than just online gossip. And this is where it starts to overlap with everything else. Because now you got one side saying there's this controlled image and carefully built empire, and another side saying there's way more going on behind the scenes than people realize. And when those two ideas collide, people start connecting it to the bigger conversation around power and influence. Then suddenly Paris Hilton gets pulled into this. And honestly, that part feels like something straight out of a movie. Because remember, Paris and Kim go way back. Kim wasn't always the main character. She was in the background, working as Paris's stylist, showing up in photos, learning the ropes of those elite social circles. And insiders have always said that Kim watched, learned, and then eventually stepped into her own spotlight. That's not even controversial. That's just part of her origin story. But now people are revisiting that timeline with a completely different lens, because Paris Hilton's name showed up in Epstein-related documents. And even though she has denied any real connection to Ghislaine Maxwell, there are photos of them at the same event. And you know how the internet works. Once photos exist, people start building narratives around them. According to reports floating around, Paris felt like she was being singled out when her name started circulating again, while others in similar circles weren't facing the same level of attention. And that's where things get tense, because now it's not just about documents or complaints, it's about perception. People are saying Paris started questioning why she was the one under the microscope, while Kim Kardashian seemed to move past everything without the same scrutiny. And from there, the story takes another turn, because insiders claim Paris may be talking more openly now than she ever has before. Again, nothing officially confirmed in terms of what she's saying or to whom, but even the possibility is enough to keep the conversation going. Because if someone from that inner circle starts speaking, people assume there's something worth hearing. And then you step back and look at all of it together. Kris Jenner's name in a complaint, Ray J pushing a legal battle that could expose private agreements, Paris Hilton being pulled back into the narrative. And suddenly it doesn't feel like isolated events anymore. It feels connected, even if the connections aren't fully proven. Now add another layer to this, and it's one people don't talk about enough: the idea of timing. All of this is happening while there's growing pressure on the Department of Justice to release more information related to Epstein's network. There's talk of deadlines, transparency laws, and public expectations that something bigger might come out. But at the same time, there's also confusion, because you've got officials saying one thing and then contradicting themselves later. One moment there's talk of lists and evidence, and the next moment it's like those things never existed. And that inconsistency is what's making people question everything. Even Joe Rogan commented on that, calling it out in his own way, basically saying it feels like people are being told different versions of the story depending on the moment. And when that happens, trust just drops completely. So now you've got a situation where nobody really knows what to believe. On one side, there are official statements that don't always line up. On the other side, there are complaints and lawsuits that raise questions but don't fully answer them. And in the middle of it all, there's the Kardashian family, still one of the most powerful names in entertainment. And that's what makes this whole thing feel so strange, because normally stories like this either blow up fast or disappear quickly. But this one, it's just lingering. Every few days, something new gets added, a new claim, a new connection, a new name. And you can feel it when people talk about it. It's not just curiosity anymore. It's that feeling of something's not fully adding up, even if no one can clearly explain what that something is yet. And honestly, the way this is unfolding, it doesn't feel like it's slowing down anytime soon. Kris Jenner is still sitting right at the center of this storm, but now everything around her feels like it's tightening, not exploding, not collapsing, just tightening. And that's almost more uncomfortable because it means things are building instead of ending. At this point, people aren't just talking about one complaint or one lawsuit anymore. They're talking about a pattern. And once people start using that word pattern, you already know the conversation has shifted from gossip to something heavier. So let's zoom out for a second and look at what's actually happening. You've got that complaint connected to Ghislaine Maxwell still sitting there unresolved. You've got Ray J pushing a legal fight that could force private details into the public. You've got Paris Hilton suddenly being dragged back into conversations she probably thought were long behind her. And then on top of all that, you've got the Department of Justice under pressure to release more information about Jeffrey Epstein and his network. And here's the part that really gets people talking. The DOJ has already been called out by a federal judge for misleading the public in the past. So now when they say anything, people are like, okay, but is that the full truth? That trust is already cracked. And once that happens, every new statement gets questioned. There's also this deadline hanging in the air. Laws, promises, expectations that more files, more names, more details could be released. But at the same time, there's this feeling that even if something does come out, it might not actually answer the questions people are asking, because we've seen this before, right? Documents get released, but key names are redacted. Pages are filled with information that looks important, but doesn't really move the story forward. And then the headlines fade and everything goes quiet again. That's why people keep bringing up those so-called co-conspirators mentioned in past Epstein-related communications. Names that were referenced, subpoenas that were issued, but no clear public follow-up. And when gaps like that exist, people fill them with speculation. Now bring it back to Kris Jenner and her world. The theory that keeps circulating isn't about proving a specific crime. It's about structure. People are comparing the idea of access, being in the right rooms with the right people at the right time, and how that translates into influence and power. Kris Jenner built an empire on connections. That's not even debated. She placed her daughters in situations that maximized visibility, relationships, and opportunity. It worked. The Kardashian name became global. Billion-dollar businesses followed, but now because of everything else happening around Epstein's network, some people are looking at that same strategy and asking, where is the line? Not saying it was crossed, but questioning how close it gets. And that's where things get uncomfortable, because it's not a clear accusation, it's a comparison people can't stop thinking about. Then there's the legal side still unfolding, with Kim Kardashian and Kris Jenner trying to keep parts of that settlement sealed. When a judge steps in and says no, those details might come out, it adds another layer of pressure. Because now it's not just about what people are saying, it's about what might actually be revealed. And you can feel how the narrative is shifting. A few years ago, the Kardashians were almost untouchable in terms of public image. Scandals came and went, but nothing really stuck in a lasting way. This feels different. Not because anything has been proven, but because the questions are bigger. Even Joe Rogan's reaction keeps getting brought up. Not because he confirmed anything, but because of that moment of silence. People are treating it like a signal. Like if someone who once immediately rejected Epstein's world is now pausing, maybe there's something worth paying attention to. But here's a reality that kind of cuts through all of it. Right now, there is no confirmed evidence linking Kris Jenner or the Kardashian family to Epstein's criminal operations. None. What exists are allegations, overlapping social circles, legal disputes, and a lot of interpretation. And that's important because without that clarity, the whole situation sits in this weird space. It's serious enough to talk about, but not solid enough to conclude anything. So the real question isn't, is this true? At least not yet. The real question is, what happens next? Does the DOJ actually investigate that complaint properly? Do more details from the Ray J case come out? Does anything new get revealed in those Epstein-related releases? Or does this all just fade? Another cycle where big claims surface, people react, and then everything slowly disappears without clear answers? Because if it fades, people will move on. They always do. But if even one solid piece of evidence comes out that connects any of these dots in a real, undeniable way, then this entire story flips overnight. And that's why everyone's still watching, not because they know what's true, but because it feels like something is still unfinished